Known miscreant Matt Lloyd has the top question. This is from a man whose character is so far below the Titanic that he has to look up to see the smokestacks, but we'll just leave that where it is. Matt Lloyd last week said last week Virginia House Delegate Nick Freitas gave an amazing address on gun control. He said what millions of common sense people across the country are thinking. In the spirit of what he communicated, where do we go from here in having an honest conversation about guns? I am of two minds on this subject. One of the things I do is try to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am, which is really not very hard at all, actually. And I had thought, I got signed up for one of these left-wing kind of a move-on kind of thing. I didn't sign up for it. That was a petition thing, and I signed a petition that I was in favor of. It turned out it was a left-wing thing. So I keep getting emails every now and then, and people send me stories and stuff. So I got this email about gun control laws and the big movement that was happening on account of, now the landscape's really shifting. Because these media professionals like Debbie Wasserman Schultz picked up these kids while their ears are still ringing from the gunfire and propped them up on TV and got them to say a couple things. And the story behind the orchestration of that alone would be enough to bring down any news organization if there was a news organization to report on the news organization and if the society were a healthy society, but we have neither of those, so there that is. But it was the petition that I'm talking about was to ban bump stocks. For those of you who may not know, a bump stock is an attachment to a rifle, and basically what it does is a simple piece of plastic, really doesn't move very much. You have to kind of learn how to massage it, but when you pull the trigger, a semi-automatic weapon, automatic weapons are not legal in California anyway. I don't really know what the status is in the country. I don't think it's legal anywhere in America, but I'm not sure about that. But in any event, California, a fully automatic rifle is not allowed. But the shooter in Vegas seemed to have one of these, and apparently, I don't know if this kid did it or not, but the thing was, let's at least, ban these bump stocks. So a bump stock basically works by you pull the trigger, the weapon recoils, and on the way back up after the recoil, it pulls the trigger again. So it's kind of like a pop, 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 pop. It's a very, it apparently moves, I've never used one, fires a semi-automatic rifle at a rate faster than you can pull the trigger, and one approaching full auto speed. And so here was my thought on this. I thought, okay, that actually seems reasonable to me. If it turns out that fully automatic weapons are illegal, and the entire purpose of a buttstock is to convert your semi-automatic into something closely approaching full automatic, I don't see any problem with that being illegal either. And I was about to go with that. And then I contacted a small group of friends I have, and I asked them their opinion on this. I just fessed up. There's 3 other people. Bert Rutan's one of them, and 2 other people that I regard very highly, Mike Satrin and Brent Regan. And I asked them for their opinion on this, and I told them what I just told you. I said, this seems reasonable to me. I'm hearing from everybody that their fully automatics are legal, but they're highly regulated. That sounds about right. Okay, so you can get, thank you very much, everybody. You can get them, but you have to really go through the kind of hell you have to go through just to get a AR-15 here in California. So in any event, I asked them what I thought about this, because this seemed reasonable to me. And I heard from Mike, who describes himself as a cultural refugee, left California many years ago, moved to Idaho, which is still a free country. And had a gun store up there, and has sold a lot of guns over his life as a professional weapons salesman. And he said, basically, the problem always comes down to you're blaming an inanimate object, and you're trying to write legislation to stop people from abusing these guns when the legislation isn't the problem. Something along those lines. And I thought, boy, I almost bid on that one. He's right. Mike's right. and I almost bid on it. It seemed sensible to me. So I continued the conversation, and I said, here's the, I'm not interested in the laws really, and I'm not interested in the arguments about, how many rounds make up a magazine and all the rest. I don't care about any of that. I care about the morality of it. I care about the morality of the entire argument, and I believe the Constitution got it right, not wrong. And so when you get into the weeds with this, you have to start asking some interesting questions. So since you asked, Matt, I'll tell you what my thought processes on this are. I could live without, I could live, this is me personally, and I'm going to come to a conclusion that doesn't completely agree with what I'm about to say. Full auto is something that I certainly could live without, and I have a moral justification for this, not just because I don't need it. Just because I don't need it is not a reason to ban it. That's how the left works on everything. I'm not trying to make that argument at all, but I am saying if for some reason you're one of these people that thinks that gun legislation will take the place where murder legislation doesn't, then I don't see a need for full auto. Especially since my understanding is that the most recent M4s don't even have a full auto setting on them. And my moral justification for this, for being, if not in favor of a ban on full auto, then at the very least accepting it, my philosophical foundation for this was not a constitutional one, it was a personal responsibility one. And my thinking on this was, if I fire a weapon, it's my responsibility where that bullet goes. I'm responsible for the course of that bullet. And if you don't understand this, and I've never met a gun owner who didn't understand this, but if you don't understand this, then you don't really, I don't want to say you don't deserve to own a gun, because I consider that a right, but in any event, you have some learning to do, let's put it that way. So my feeling was that either through allowing full auto mechanically or through bump stocks, you are no longer able to have reasonable amount of control over where those rounds go. And that was my and probably remains my objection to it. It's not that there's no constitutional grounds for banning them or infringing in any way on this, but that horse has left the stable. So since they're going to mince this thing up, I thought, okay. If the military is not using full auto because they understand that it's basically, I know there are probably people who are going to tell me I'm wrong about this, but essentially a full automatic burst is very, very difficult to keep on target. Very difficult. And the 3-round setting on the M4 seems to me to be the, I'm sure that setting was determined by studies that showed that by the time you've gotten the 3rd round downrange, your sight is so far off the target that anything after that's probably a waste of time. So my philosophical grounds for agreeing on a full auto or a bump stock ban were based on the fact that I don't believe you should be able to fire weapons that you do not have control over. We're not at war here in America. This is a question of whose nose is getting hit by me swinging my fist. What I mean when I say we're not at war here in America is, in the simplest conception of a war, there's a line, and I'm on one side of the line, and the enemy's on the other side of the line. And if my bullets go anywhere in that 180-degree arc forward, then okay. But we're not in that situation. And since we're talking about weapons like this that are powerful weapons and not as powerful as hunting rifles, if you really want to just go through walls, you're going to be hard-pressed to beat a 30-06 bolt-action rifle or the M1 or something along those lines. But we do live in a world where we are surrounded by friendlies, and that means we have an obligation to do our best to not hit any friendlies. Now, listen, if somebody's coming at me with a meat cleaver and I'm backing up down the street and I've got a 45 and I fire 5 rounds at that guy, and one of those rounds misses him and strikes somebody and kills them, I'm going to regret that for the rest of my life, but I'm not going to regret the decision to fire. Because it was my intention to put these rounds in this particular place. Anyway, I'm getting too deep in the weeds here. So that was my feeling on it. So that led me to think about the whole idea of background checks, which I know a lot of people disapprove of, and I disapprove of them because I just have to answer this question. Victoria771 says, can you control buckshot? Yes, you can control a shotgun in the same way you can control any other weapon. The funnel on a shotgun is much wider. So I mean, I know you understand what a shotgun is, Victoria. I'm not trying to talk down to you in that way. But the funnel is wider, which means that the pellets go further away from your intended center of target. But the trade-off there is because these pellets are so small and because they disperse quite a wide distance, that shotguns lose energy pretty quickly compared to rifle bullets. So, and since each individual pellet is so light, they've got essentially no penetrating power, once you get past, once you miss the guy. Those pellets aren't going to go through walls and stuff like that. Anyway, so then I thought about, okay, background checks. This is the key contention, I think, is the background checks. I don't know what the status is in the rest of the country. I should know, and I don't know. I do know that in California, there's not only a background check, but there's a 10-day waiting period. And this, again, I'm having a philosophical discussion here because the conclusion I reached philosophically, I had to abandon because the difference between the philosophical world and the real world is an actual difference. And I want to live in the real world. So here's what I was thinking as far as the background check goes. Here's what I would like to see in terms of if I had a perfect world. I would like to see somebody goes in to apply to buy a gun. Somebody goes into a gun store, legal gun store, wants to buy a gun. I would like there to be a button that this person could push, and then this button would, the gun dealer would enter this guy's name and maybe social security number or whatever, pushes the button, and the button produces a result that either says felonies or no felonies. And if it comes back no felonies, he gets his gun right then, bam. If it comes back felonies, then he doesn't. And that's what I would like in terms of background checks, because I don't think felons should be able to buy guns, and I don't think that's unreasonable either. Felons are people that have already shown that they cannot obey the law, especially violent felons. And that needs to be made as hard as possible. Not going to make a whole lot of difference, but it needs to be made as hard as possible from just a philosophical basis. And so I thought if I could have a background check that basically checked my background or the background of that potential buyer, and all it did was check to see whether they were a felon or not, and then not only was the answer destroyed, but the fact that you even asked the question was destroyed. That I could live with and I think would be actually a superb solution. In other words, a background check that's pretty much instantaneous and returns nothing about the person other than felony convictions, yes or no. And if yes or if no, the answer is destroyed and the fact that the search was started in the first place was destroyed. That I would be comfortable with. Now, the problem is that while that's technologically not only doable, it's easy. I think it's much easier than the current system we have. The problem is that while you could write a law that says this background check, results of the background check, no matter how they turn out, shall be destroyed, and any record of having done this search shall be destroyed, is a lovely thought, and it's a great thought for the philosophical world, but in the real world, what we're learning is that this government is keeping data, and so are private companies, on us, and that they're lying to us about it, and that they have been lying to us about it, that the Federal Bureau of Investigation has become utterly politicized, and I don't have any confidence in whatever confidence I did have in the moral integrity of federal law enforcement has been greatly shaken in the last couple of years, and certainly in the last 5 or 10 years, as computer memory continues to become so relatively inexpensive that essentially everything is recorded. Now, the reason I'm against it now is because the check won't be, the background check will not be eliminated, and the fact that you search will not be eliminated. There'll be a record of both the outcome and a record of having asked the question. And all of this together goes into a database, which is the thing that I think most of us fear the most, is a database of who owns what. I did an entire video on this, but I remember one of the most impressed, of all the moments I've had to meet people in this amazing line of work, one of the times I was most impressed of all time was when I was listening to this guy who was a commander of a Green Beret unit who was told by his superior officer that he had to ask all of his men, he was told, this is during the Obama White House, he was told that it was a direct order from the Pentagon that he had to ask the men in his unit, Green Berets, whether or not they had any weapons at home, and if so, what kind and how many. And he just simply said, "Sir, I will not obey that order." And I just was like, my God, we still have men like this. But that's what they want. Now, it's interesting because the deterrent effect of ownership of weapons, Natasha laughs at the fact that we have such a puny little lock on our door. I think it's the first thing she noticed in California and in America was that the door lock was just, this dainty little deadbolt kind of thing. And in Russia, you have 4 or 5 locks on a steel door. Chung, 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 and you got a real serious issue there. And she said, not too long ago, she said that the lock on our front door was, just seemed like it wasn't. Our door is surrounded by glass, is what it was. I remember now. There's like decorative glass around our actual door. And speaking from her background in Russia, she just thought this was ludicrous, that anybody who wanted to could smash the window and just open the door. And I said to her, yeah, but that glass is not here to protect us from intruders. The 45 under my bed is there to protect us from intruders. The glass is there to wake me up and let me know something's going on. That's what the glass is for. And that is the essence of the gun argument in terms of crime, is this deterrence that is an invisible force field that exists, and you can tell it exists from very simple logic. Very simple logic. And I don't know why anybody else is talking about this. This was the entire point of number 1 with a bullet. The areas that have the areas that are the safest from burglaries and violent crime are the areas that have the most valuable stuff. Has no one else put this together before? I've never heard anybody basically coming out with the evidence that this works. The neighborhoods with the lowest crime rates are the neighborhoods where all the really expensive stuff is. If you're going to break into a house, all other things being equal, you're much better off breaking into a house in Bel Air than you are breaking into a house in Torrance. Much better off. So why is it that the valuable stuff, why is it that the crime rate is so low where all the valuable stuff is? Now people say, well, the police protection is better there. Yes, it is somewhat better there. It is, no question. But you don't see police cars patrolling up and down all the time. The reason is because criminals understand that these neighborhoods are protected. And they're not just protected by a faster responding police force. They're protected by people who have weapons and are not afraid to use them. And this is why the murder rate and the burglary rate in Plano, Texas is so astonishingly low, and it's so astonishingly high in Baltimore and Chicago. It's got nothing to do with the people there. It's nothing to do with their color. It's got nothing to do with anything. It's just common sense. It's a criminal is a predator. And like any successful predator, anybody who becomes a career prisoner, criminal, same thing, eventually, give them enough time. Anybody who becomes a career criminal, and by career criminal means makes a living at it, has to have an understanding for what their job is and what the risks of the job are. And every time they go into a house, commit a burglary, or a rape or a murder for that matter, every time they do that, whether they understand that they're doing it or not, they're performing a risk-reward calculation. What is the chance of me getting something valuable out of this house versus what is the chance of me going to jail or getting killed? And criminals are making these decisions right now, right at the second, in real time, thousands, if not millions of times every day. Criminals are making an individual personal decision about risk and reward, and the reward in rich areas is enormous. But the risk is much higher, and the reason it's higher is because those people are going to defend their own property. That's why it's higher. And furthermore, a very big part of this is if somebody, this book I told you about that just meant so much to me, The Corner, I reread it again after this whole incident in Illinois. And they talk about this one thing that this guy who I had such deep sympathy for and affection for, a guy named Gary McCullough, who's now also become a character in the Star Citizen game thing, by the way. John Boyd and Gary McCullough. I think I'm going to name all of these characters after people who people should know and don't know. But Gary McCullough was the guy who was studying to be an engineer and basically learned how to learned how to work the stock market and had his own restoration company and really was a success in a regular way, and fell into heroin and cocaine use and basically died of an overdose. But he was doing what they called a caper. A caper is a crime that doesn't hurt somebody you know. And they went all the way across town, and they broke into this person's house. They knew it was a working person, so they knew that they would be gone during the day. So when they knew that he was gone during the day, these two guys went over there, broke into the house, started taking whatever working man stuff this guy had and putting it in the refrigerator, and then the two of them walked down the stairs with the refrigerator full of stolen stuff, but with the door closed, obviously. And as they were coming out, the guy in the next balcony leaned over and said, "Hey man, for a cut of that, I didn't see a thing." And Gary McCullough, who was by all accounts a very different kind of guy, was outraged at this, that this person was such a lousy neighbor that he was willing to go along with or turn a blind eye to stealing the stuff. And the great point of this entire story was the blinkered morality that happens when you become a professional criminal, and the weird ways that you justify this, the weird things you tell yourself in order to be able to live with yourself. If you have a conscience, if you don't have a conscience, you just don't care. But it's interesting that Gary was talking, outraged about what a low life that guy was for saying, "I'm going to look the other way," when this is a neighbor and somebody obviously knew really well. They were like right next door to each other, and of course, that overlooks the fact that he was the one stealing the refrigerator's worth of stuff. That doesn't happen in wealthy neighborhoods. If somebody hears a crack, if I hear a crack of glass from the house next door to me at 3 o'clock in the morning, the police are going to get called, and I'm going to be looking out the window at the very least, and I'll be looking out the window armed at the very least. And this is why there are high crime neighborhoods and low crime neighborhoods. So, I guess what I was getting at is just basically the mechanisms for reasonable gun control are already in place. Brent sent me a list of laws that are already in place. When people say that we should not allow guns to go to felons, we should restrict gun sales to felons, and we should restrict gun sales to people with known psychological problems. We should restrict gun sales on minors. When we should restrict all these things that they want. Brent sent me a list of all these things that the gun control people want, and those laws are already on the books. And I missed doing a firewall on this shooting. I just missed it. I was still thinking about it, and by the time I'd gotten what I was looking for, the story was gone cold. And I hate to say this, but my first thought was, well, it'll be hot again in the not too distant future. But ultimately, the question that ultimately want the gun control people to answer for me is, when somebody is ready to commit, not only ready, preparing, dedicated to, focusing on, committing the most heinous moral crime in the inventory, mass murder of children, when somebody has crossed that moral threshold and is ready to commit mass murder of children, why on earth do you think that they're going to pay attention to something that says gun-free zone or be deterred by any of this legislation? They are about to break the biggest law there is. And the idea that a regulation, a technical regulation, is going to prevent this somehow, it's going to be an obstacle to them, is just plain barking mad. It's just plain mad. It's lunacy, and the reason they do it is they have a totemic belief in this. And what I mean by that is the weapon, and especially the AR-15, has become to the left a totem. It's an object that has its own spiritual force to it, magical powers. And they are determined to destroy this symbolic object, and they believe that by destroying the symbolic object, they will destroy the problem. Now, after the shooting in Parkland and all this, students on camera and stuff, I didn't see the video. I heard the soundbite of the video. And there was a father who I think lost a child at Parkland. And let me just say this so we don't have any misunderstandings about anything. You are not going to hear me criticizing personally or saying, well, this guy's an idiot. A father who just lost a child can say whatever he damn well wants to. And I'm not addressing this to him at all by any means. I'm just trying to get to the root of what he said. He said that, okay, so there was Columbine, and we had one. We didn't know they were there, but we had one. But after we had one, we should have fixed it. We should have just fixed it. I want to know why we didn't fix it after Columbine. And my first thought, again, not trying to be flipped with this guy, was, well, why didn't we fix it after Abel? You know, when Cain bashed Abel's head, and why didn't we fix it then? And that's really it, right? I mean, that's what this entire thing is about, is that. It's like we have to fix it. Well, what do we have to fix? Well, we have to fix the sales of AR-15s, but it's not AR-15s that are causing the problem. What do we have to fix? We have to fix murder, and that's why these people will not accept the fact, and that's why they will say guns killed these people. True, but it could have been a car, or could have been a knife, could have been a toaster, could have been a baseball bat, could have been any one of those inanimate objects that killed these people, which means really that the object didn't kill the people, the person killed the people. Explosives could have killed the people. So, the difference between the left and the right is that the left, let me go with progressives here because I consider the far left to be actual architects who understand what they're doing. I think most progressives are simply people who generally probably mean well, but don't have the emotional strength to look at things as they are. Eric Blake points out that Columbine happened during the assault weapons ban. Of course it did, Eric. And this is the thing, you see. So why is it why is it that the left is unwilling to face the music on this? In other words, they're saying murder should be illegal. Well, it is illegal. Well, that law preventing first-degree murder is not stopping it. So what law do we have to put in place? And now we're down to the root of the issue. The arguments on my side of this, on our side of this, are so overwhelming that in order to simply throw them away and to believe in your heart that convincing Apple computers to remove the pistol emoji and replace it with a water pistol is going to reduce violence and murder, to believe that, and many people do, to believe that, you have to be driven by some psychological force that's very powerful. Because that is an infantile, not just a childlike belief, it's an infantile belief. When a kid chews a Pop-Tart into the general vague shape of a pistol and you lock the school down over it, you're not behaving like an adult. You're not behaving like an adolescent. You're not behaving like a child. You're behaving like an infant, like a pre-language infant. So why do people use these infantile arguments and stay with them in such infantile fashion? Because they cannot handle what the consequences are if you don't believe this fairy tale, that you can stop murder with legislation. They don't want to accept the reality of what the alternative to that belief is. In other words, they believe that there is legislation that can stop mass murders because they see mass murders as something that can happen to them and they would like to stop it. They're afraid of it. It's not a bad thing to be afraid of. When they talk about an AR-15 ban, though, we really get down to the heart of the issue. And this is really important. After a school shooting, there are calls for banning AR-15s. We'll just take that as sort of the blanket argument, the blanket dynamic. But in 2016, 8,300 black people were murdered. If any, by AR-15s, virtually all of them by cheap illegal handguns. 8,000 murders just among black Americans in 1 year. In Chicago on a weekend. So I did the math, and others have done the math. The guy who did the shooting in Vegas killed 59 people, or 60. And the total number of homicides during that month in Chicago alone was 59, one short. So every month in 10 cities in America, there's a death toll equivalent to the worst mass shooting in American history, and they're not saying a thing about it. Nothing. They're not saying boo. So, why is that? Well, whether they realize it or not, these big liberals are not trying to do something about that problem, but they are trying to do something about this school shooting and mass shooting problem, because they understand that a mass shooter in Vegas or in a high school could affect them, their lives personally, while they know for certain fact that they're not going to get shot in an inner city environment so long as they don't go into the inner city. They can control it, you see. So it is that fundamental selfishness and self-centeredness, and that's one layer deeper than where we were before, but there's two layers, I think, beyond this, and they get more interesting as you go deeper. Beyond that level is the idea that your personal safety has to be somebody else's responsibility. That the one thing we learned from Parkland was that, there's no need to arm the students or the citizens. For God's sakes, no need to do that. Just put a sheriff there with a gun. That'll solve the problem. Well, saw how that worked out. they refuse to accept that people should be, I just had a little flash. I just had a little flash. Maybe not such a little flash. Yeah, this is it. So think about this. There are people who are psychologically prepared to defend themselves, and then there are people who aren't. And this is what makes you either a gun control advocate or a gun control opponent. Do you feel that you have the right and the responsibility to defend yourself? And the people that say yes to that question are the people who are psychologically and physically prepared to do it. The people who say no are the people who are psychologically and physically not prepared to do it. And here's this breakthrough thought I just this second had, and this may actually be very important. I may actually be onto the actual, the main vein of progressive resistance to this and their magical belief in gun control. It just this second occurred to me that right now we have a world where some people can decide to defend themselves and other people can decide not to defend themselves. And they understand that that puts them at a disadvantage. But what I just realized was that if you are not allowed to defend yourself, if it's against the law, and in fact, not even against the law, if you are physically incapable of buying a weapon so that you can defend yourself, then it releases you from the obligation and the cowardice involved by not doing it when you can do it. I think that's really it. The reason that they want to ban guns is because they are not willing to use guns themselves, and that not only do they not want other people to be able to do it since they can't do it, they not only want nobody able to do it if they can't do it, they also want to be told that they are not allowed to defend themselves, because if the big state says to some professor at Berkeley, no, you're not allowed to own a gun, then he can just simply, well, okay, well, we have to wait for the police to come. They simply will not accept the fact that things like this happen. And that's really important. And to me, the final layer of this, the bottom layer of this, is even more simple, really. There's all reasons why some people want to legislate murder away and think it's possible, and there's all these mechanisms and all these techniques, and there's all these motivations. But when you get right down to it, the bottom line is much simpler. We've become so successful as a society. This is this asymptotic thing I've been talking about for years. Exponential growth is when, as time goes on, the growth increases faster and faster and faster. The inverse of that is asymptotic growth, where as time goes on, the rate of increase slows and slows and slows. Well, now we have a society where so much is given to so many people at birth that you have to do an enormous amount of work to move the needle a tiny little distance, the opposite for exponential growth. So as a result of this society that has provided security, food, health, convenience, comfort, entertainment, all of it, given to you at birth if you entered America in the United States, in the last 30 years especially. A suburban person in America has never experienced the reality not of what the outside world is, but what of life is. Here's what I mean to say by that. If you think about it, you may not feel this way personally, or you may. If you do, it's not a character fault. It's just the society you grew up in. But if you think about it, the way we talk about death in this country is that if you do not die at age 96 in bed, surrounded by your loving family who you've had plenty of time to say goodbye to, and then just drift softly and float off into that good night. If you don't die at 100 years old in bed with no pain whatsoever, then it's a tragedy, and there's something that has to be done about it. So you hear about the tragedy of this car accident, or somebody got cancer and it was a tragedy, and this and this and this and this and this, and we basically say that anything other than living 100 years and dying peacefully is a tragedy, which means it's preventable, Because if it wasn't preventable, it wouldn't be a tragedy. A tragedy is something bad that happens. And if this was always going to happen to everybody at point or another, if we were thinking like healthy people, we wouldn't call it this and we wouldn't think about it this way. But we do. So we talk about this, or there's a busload of kids that, goes over a cliff in a car, in a school bus, or something explodes, and that's a tragedy, and this tragedy, and that tragedy, and everybody's taken so young, and so on. And what you get down to, when you really get down to the brass tacks of it is that we have become so safe that we think that the world owes us safety, and we think that we can manufacture safety. That safety, perfect safety, is an achievable goal, and that if we don't achieve that goal, then we obviously haven't spent enough money or filed enough lawsuits or made enough laws. And that's how people think about life, whether they realize it or not, or whether you realize it or not. And what that tells me is that we as a country, I think probably more than any other people in the world, with our geographical isolation, which is so psychologically comforting to us in a way that we don't appreciate unless we spend a lot of time with somebody who doesn't have that. Just as a quick aside, the geography of the world that you grow up with as an American is the geography of safety. You have Canada you have an ocean to the east, you have a bigger ocean to the west, you've got an ocean of snow and nice people to the north, and south we have a little bit of a problem. But even that's not a serious problem. It's not like an invasion. Look, I'm well aware of the problem of the southern border, right? But when I say it's not like tanks are coming over there. It's a problem, and it's getting worse. But what I'm saying is that just being born in America provides you with a sense of psychological buffering, which is why we don't behave like the rest of the world. We don't behave like the rest of the world because we're not part of the rest of the world. We are oceans away from the rest of the world. In Europe, everybody lives right up against everybody else, and the French are constantly worried about what the Germans are going to do, and the British are going to do, and what the Russians are going to do, and same thing in Africa, same thing in South America, all of it. What are they going to do? What do they do? The Canadians are only concerned about one thing, and that's what is America going to do, and we don't care about anything. And some progressives look at that as like, my God, what a horrible cultural failure. It's not cultural failure. It's a spectacular success. It's a financial and material success, but it's even bigger than that. We were out at a restaurant a couple nights ago. And we had a very colorful waiter. It was late at night, and he was a really, really cool guy, actually. And a strange-looking cat at Jerry's Deli. And Natasha said, there's so many interesting faces here. And she's right, because there aren't that many interesting faces in Russia. And there aren't that many interesting faces in China or in Japan or even, you don't see lots of Swedes in South America as a general rule. And so that isolation, that sense of isolation that America has, we have because we are a self-contained country. I don't mean that just economically or in terms of oil or anything. I mean, we are a culturally self-contained country. The best Chinese food in the world is in an American Chinese restaurant. The best Mexican food in the world is at a well-run Mexican-American restaurant run in America. And we've got everything we need here. And we don't particularly care who the leading pop stars in Croatia are. But they care about American stars. So anyway, we live in this world that is not like the real world. And I believe we have come to consciously or subconsciously think that any form of death is a disaster or a tragedy that could have been prevented had other laws in place. And you can then start to speculate on what laws you need, and then off we go. Ohio Coastie, where did that come from? Ohio Coastie wrote something, and I just put it into an article I'm going to put in my firewall that I shoot tomorrow. I already wrote it. And he wrote this thing that I saw. It's like, good times breed soft men, well, weak men. Weak men breed hard times breed hard men or strong men, and strong men breed good times. That's the cycle. I mangled that, so I'll read it again the way I saw it, because I was trying to translate them. Yeah, here we go. Bad times make strong men. Right? That's pretty straightforward. If things are horrible, the weak have to become strong, or else the weak perish. And only the strong survive. Bad times make strong men. Okay, it makes sense. Strong men make good times. Yes, this is the history of our country. We as a people, as an American people, America wasn't really around for the bad times make strong men. I'm talking about as a culture now. The bad times were what the king was doing in England and what everybody else was doing in their countries before they came here. They left the bad times. But the fact that they were having to deal with bad times made the founding fathers strong men and the first generations of Americans strong men and so on, in the Civil War and so on. Bad times make people strong. It has to. It kills the weak, whether you like it or not. And I don't like it, but it does. And it takes most of the weak and toughens them up. And if I'd had to go and excavate bodies from trenches, like many people had to do at my age, who am I kidding, at my age, at a third of my age, if I had to remove rotting human corpses from trenches or tanks or armored vehicles, I wouldn't be quite so picky about going underneath the house to get the possum, really, would I? So that's what bad times make strong men. Makes sense. Strong men make good times. Okay. So if you've got a person who went through hell and got strong because of it, the one thing that they do is that they make the society around them better, and they are determined to pass on to their children a more comfortable, safer world, which is what everybody wants. But let's take it line by line. Strong men make good times. Certainly the history of this country, greatest generation, all the rest of it, all the sacrifices, all of the effort, all the hard work, all of the building that was done in the 19th century, all of it. Strong people were making good times. And our military especially has been so strong for 3 generations now. We haven't had an existential threat to this country. So that these strong men that are out there defending us have made us a happy place. Disneyland. What could go wrong in America? There can't be mass shootings not here in America. It doesn't happen in America. Strong men make good times. But the problem is, good times make men weak. And this is what we've been seeing. And we are right now at the end of this line 3 and the beginning of line 4. Good times make men weak. We live in an era of such prosperity and such medical miracles and accident preventions and airbags and not a single jet crash in 17 years or whatever the case may be. So good times, which is what we live in right now, are making us weak. I didn't want to go into there and get that possum. I really didn't. I would have if I had to, but I really would have paid a much larger sum of money than I did to not have to do that. Good times make men weak. And here's a living example of it. And finally, weak men make bad times. And this is where we are right now. We are leaving the good times make men weak. We know that. We've seen it everywhere. We've seen the social justice warriors and the emotional fragility of this generation that's coming up. And they're going to be very weak people. They are very weak people. And weak people make bad times. And school shootings are a result of school shootings are bad times that are coming, and they're coming more as a result of weak men. And my job and your job is to make sure that, here, just read it to you again because I know it's not in front of you. Bad times make strong men make good times make weak men make bad times. And I thought our job was to prevent the bad times, but I realize now that is impossible. It's just much too big and overwhelming. It's human nature, and it's built into us the same way that murder is built into us. So I no longer think that it's my job or our job to prevent the bad times. Now I've come to believe that our job is to make sure that there is a pathway back to line 1. So here we are in line 4, and the cycle is a cycle. So somebody's got to get us back to line 1. Bad times make strong men. Okay, let's just read it again as if it was the future. Bad times make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. Bad times make strong men. So, our responsibility is not to prevent the bad times. That can't be helped. The reaction against the gun control argument is a result of people living in a comfortable society where elements of the people that want to control that society make sure that nobody hears any alternate opinions. Because if every person in America heard the argument I just made, and especially got it down to a reasonable size, they would understand what I'm saying, which is that life does not owe you safety, that there's no such thing as safety, and it never was. And to ask for safety is ridiculous. It's insane. It's actually genuinely insane to expect safety. And the final payoff, the final nugget inside all of that is simply this. If you accept the fact that there is no safety, you are a much happier person on a day-to-day basis than you are if you're somebody who's constantly, perpetually worried about what's going to happen to you. This is why they're actually cheating themselves. You die 1,000 deaths if you're a coward, and people are becoming afraid of everything, and they become more afraid of everything every day. And that doesn't make them happier, because reality is not swayed by their arguments, or their sternly worded letters, or their congressional committees, or their crying children and parents on television. Reality is not much concerned with that at all. In fact, I'd be willing to say reality just doesn't give a damn about that at all. So once you accept the fact that there is no such thing as safety, that you can improve the safety of things, and that your entire life should be an effort of trying to make life as safe as you can for the people you love and care about, but you can't get there, and you have to understand that before you start. Once you get that, then you don't do things like go through life without examining it. You don't take for granted all of these things. You actually start to realize, okay, number one, the best chance of me living a long and happy life is for me to be free and successful and free to defend myself. And the second part of that equation is to make sure that you understand that if you are the most well-trained crack shot in the world, that you've had all kinds of training, you're wearing a bulletproof vest, you have all your inoculations, you're in perfect health, you jog every day, you have your immune system checked, you're constantly going in for MRI scans, you drive whatever the modern equivalent of a Volvo is with airbags, you do every single thing right, your house has no poisons in it, you eat organic foods, all the rest of it. You get to this place where you've done all of these things to improve your chances of living, and they will improve your chances of living. There's no question about that. Just quit smoking, for example, will improve your chances of living quite significantly. But you can be that guy and have a refrigerator fall on you from down a staircase, and there's nothing you can do about that. Nothing. Or you could find yourself confronted with somebody who, through either insanity or greed or whatever reason, whatever defective childhood they had growing up, is determined to kill you. And that doesn't go away. And you can't make it go away. And here's the irony of what I was trying to close with. You can make it go away. You can't make the murder go away. But if you accept the fact that you can't make the murder go away, then you can make the fear go away. And since your chance of actually being in a mass shooting is as close to zero as zero can be, and not be zero, you have essentially solved your own problem. In other words, all of these progressives and all of these gun control advocates are trying to put this legislation in place because they're afraid that this will happen to them or their children. And that's something to be frightened of. But if you accept the fact that murder is not subject to legislation, then two things happen. Your chances of surviving increase once you realize that you're responsible for your own survival. They increase dramatically. Just driving defensively increases your chances of living longer, much longer. Quitting smoking, being responsible for your own life, arming yourself. If you are willing to accept responsibility, if you have the courage, if you have the emotional courage to be willing to accept responsibility for your own life, your chance of living that ideal life of longevity and happiness increases significantly. And that's good. But what's even better is, if you come to this fundamental acceptance of reality, that murder is built into the human being, it's not a defect, it's part of the design, it's there. And the murder instinct has kept us alive and made us the dominant species on the planet and given us things like Twinkies and so on. It's all driven by the murder instinct to protect ourselves and to make ourselves secure. It's done us a lot more good than harm, although it's done us a lot of harm. But in any event, it's not something you can detach. It's not an attachment. It's part of the structure. And so, okay, you accept the fact that these things can happen. You prepare for them as much as you can, and then you put it out of your mind. And then you live the kind of life that you and I are living, and not the kind of life that these progressives are living. You live the kind of life where you realize that since you understand it can happen, you do what you can to prepare yourself for it. And if it turns out that it happens, then it happens. But you don't die every day. And that's what these people do. They die every day. They're terrified of everything all the time. And they just die scores of times a day. I wonder how many people understand that these fears that they carry, this demand to constantly do something about something that cannot be done, means that on some emotional level, they go through a mass shooting every day. They're involved in it. They're suffering grief from it, and they're terrified of it. And I'm not terrified of it at all. And not just because of the odds. I mean, I understand the odds of it happening are very slim. That's a comfort. The chance of an airplane crashing are extremely slim. That's a comfort too. Still happens though. Hasn't happened in 18 years now, 17 years. But it happens, and it's going to happen again. And maybe it'll be you. Probably not, but maybe. Okay. There's nothing that can be done about that. I cannot imagine improvements to airline safety over what we have had for 17 years. When you have had 17 years of 40 million flights a year or something like that, and not a single fatal accident in almost 2 decades, you've reached, and in my opinion, honestly, far surpassed, and I mean far surpassed, anything I thought was possibly feasible in terms of engineering and legislation and all the rest. You've reached the limit. Now you're at the absolute top of the asymptote where you have to move monumental amounts of energy and resources and work to move the needle up just a tiny little bit further. So taking air travel as an example, that's it. We've asymptoted ourselves out of that particular concern. If you're still afraid to fly, it's understandable. It's a foreign environment. You have no control over it. Visual cues that are coming to you as a primate, looking way down at the ground and feeling things shake, you're supposed to be afraid of that kind of thing. That's how we didn't fall out of trees when we lived in trees, and there was no reason to abandon that. So when you're up very high in the sky and you feel things shaking, you're afraid, and it's not an unreasonable thing to feel, because if you were up high in a tree shaking back when we lived in trees, it better have your undivided attention right away, or else you and your fear of high places doesn't get passed down. Really, more likely your lack of fear of high places doesn't get passed down. And that's it, I think. It really is amazing how facing the idea of dying liberates you. And I was going to say that has made me so much more at ease, and it certainly has. It doesn't make me more reckless. It just means that my life is more enjoyable by a large margin. When I was adolescent and in my 20s and 30s, I was terrified of dying all the time. I thought, I had some cancer or something all the time, and it was just torture. But when I think about that, I realize that my life has gotten so much more comfortable. And then I realized, but you still suffer a great deal of pain over things. And I realized I do. The business with the Illinois gubernatorial candidate really, really, really wrecked me hard. Seeing your name as a white supremacist in every major newspaper across America is a psychological blow that is memorable. And what I'm trying to understand and trying to realize and trying to accomplish is I'm trying to give myself the same protection against that sort of moral wound as I've tried to give myself a protection against physical wounds. I understand that I can be killed in a car accident, and I understand that all these things can happen. They can happen. Probably won't happen today, but they can happen, and there's nothing I can do about it, so there it is. I have to learn, I have to teach myself that these other things are going to happen too. That this moral agony, and that's what it was. It was agony. The moral agony of being falsely accused is something that is not going to go away either. It's there. I can reduce it by quitting what I'm doing, but that's the entire purpose of it. And the one thing that we've learned about these people is they don't care if you are or not. They don't care at all. I thought they did it. I really did. Up until recently, and I mean recently like last month or so. Maybe not until right this very second. Sometimes the reason I love doing the show is speaking things aloud. You realize things that you hadn't really thought about before. I had thought, excuse me, that Media Matters was funded by Soros so that they could find things that conservatives say, take them out of context or put them together in such a way as to demonize this person, and then that person would lose credibility in the eyes of the public, and that was the mission, was to destroy the credibility of the messenger. But now I realize that that's not the mission. That helps, but that's not the mission. The mission of Media Matters is not to discredit me in front of the public. The mission of Media Matters is to discredit me in front of myself. And if they do that sufficiently, then I'll simply stop doing what I'll do. And that's the ultimate goal of what they want to do. So when I saw the interview with Stefan Molyneux that they pulled all these quotes out of, and when I read I couldn't bear to watch it. I was that traumatized. I couldn't bear to watch it. I couldn't face what I thought I might have said. So I had a transcript made, and then I read the transcript. That's how bad it hurt. And when I read the transcript, I was filled with relief, but I was also filled with a serious, something that actually went beyond hatred. It must have been the same thing that the Marines experienced when they started fighting the Japanese. It's beyond hatred. It includes hatred, but it's beyond hatred. It's not just this unfocused. It's that line from Apocalypse Now. Shot right between the eyes with a diamond bullet. It's a realization when I read the transcripts of that interview, and later, the following week, when I did another event that they almost canceled because of that article. The organizers of that event a week later had some blowback about it, about inviting me. And so the organizers of that event took the remarkable step of actually listening to the interview in question. And I had 2 or 3 of those people tell me, we knew within 3 minutes that this whole thing was nonsense, that it was just a fake news story designed to destroy you. I needed that. So I have to learn how to toughen myself up against the moral pain. I'm not so worried about the physical pain. It's a kind of a moral death, It's the death of your reputation. It's the assuming you let it become that. But it feels like the death of your reputation. It feels like the death of your identity, really. It feels like someone has murdered who you are. And you have to spend the rest of your life convincing people that what you didn't say, you didn't say. I remember we were walking through the airport, Natasha. I could not have gotten through this without her. Honestly, I don't know what I would have done without my wife. I really don't know how I would have gotten through that. To see that in the LA Times and everywhere else and it was just monumentally appalling. But you I don't know how else to describe this. You end up believing it. I think if you have a conscience and a soul, and somebody writes that about you, you just kind of stop and say, my God, I must be a horrible person. It's really your first reaction is, well, your first instant, your knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, no, I didn't do that. It's obviously nuts. But then right after that, it's kind of like, okay. And I remember we were walking through the airport the week afterwards. We were going to that other event I mentioned in Tucson, rather. Said Phoenix, it was Tucson. And I remember walking through the airport. And over time, I've had the experience of having people look at me longer than probably they should. And I've come to realize that this is probably somebody who recognizes me. And sometimes, most of the time, it's you can tell it's a positive thing. And sometimes, every now and then, you get kind of a scowl or something. And after this Media Matters thing came out, I remember going through the airport at LAX and having that experience and looking around and thinking, oh, there's somebody who's recognized Bill Whittle, famous white supremacist. And there's somebody else who's recognized famous scientific racist Bill Whittle. And there's this, and there's that. And it's not a nice feeling. So, as I say, I learned more from this show than you can possibly imagine. And what I've come to realize, and put a nice bow on it, I'm not going to take any other questions. You're pretty much done. What I've come to realize is this. The Media Matters article, and especially hearing it from the Republicans, that's what hurt. The Media Matters thing had been out there for a couple of years, and I'd been, shocked by it and hurt by it the first time around. But it wasn't the fact that it was there. It was the fact that that Republican candidate instantly took it as true and made it a news story. Made it a news story by canceling the event. I've talked with somebody who was there for the whole thing, who I admire very much, and he said, can you imagine how different her campaign would have been and how different that news would have been if instead of selling you out, she doubled down on you? Can you imagine how different that whole thing would have been if she responded by saying, this is a horrible smear job against a good man, and this is exactly why I'm running for governor, to stop this kind of assassination. That's why they're destroying our state, and this is how they do it. I thought, well, yeah. So, there you go. So it's just something, it's like any other piece of reality out there. It's just another element of the reality of life. They're going to do it. I got a little sidetracked when I talked about that diamond bullet of a feeling beyond hatred. It wasn't just the hatred of what they did to me, and it wasn't just the hatred of what they made me do to myself. It was when I read how much exculpatory material was just in that one interview, when I realized how much other stuff they had to push aside in order to pull these quotes and make the case they were making. And that's just one article. And I realized that my entire career, hundreds of cases that they had to overlook in order to make this case, that not only filled me with this kind of a hatred, but it actually astonished me. I think that's probably the best word for it. It astonished me in the way that the solar eclipse astonished me, that people could be that evil, that they could be so obsessed with their position or their ego or their politics or their own vanity or their virtue signal or whatever, that they would go to the trouble. I'm talking about the Media Matters people now. Go to the trouble of destroying somebody in a way that they knew wasn't true. And I know that's an extremely naive thing to say. And God knows I've paid my price for the naivety I have had, and I'll continue to pay it. But I simply, it just amazed me. It's amazing to me, like an eclipse, that somebody was capable of that. But yeah, they are. Absolutely, they're capable of it. And this is our problem. This is our problem as conservatives. We simply cannot imagine that the left is fighting as dirty as they are intentionally. We think that all we have to do is prove to them that we're not racist, then they'll stop calling us racist. They know we're not racist. They know. They know it. They know all of these things that we constantly defending ourselves against. Always. They know them all. And they're using them intentionally to beat us with our own decency, because decent people could not use that strategy. A decent person could not destroy a philosophical enemy through lying about that person. You just can't do it. But there are people out there who can, and they're the people that are going to do their level best to make sure that all of this stuff goes away. Which I think will do it for the episode tonight. A one-question episode, but what a great question. And what a terrible, terrible tragedy it was that it was asked by no miscreant Matt Lloyd. But other than that, it was a very good show, I thought. Yeah. They're succeeding, and they're shutting down all our YouTube views, and not shutting them down because that would be obvious. But they're convincing me. Did I talk about this 2 weeks ago? I don't think I did. I don't think I did. I'll come back with this ever. In the aftermath of the Parkland shooting, somebody, the guy who I was telling you about, who said, "Can you imagine what the response would have been?" Posted my guns State of the Union address on guns on Facebook, and it got seen by 35 million people. That's my entire career. It's 35 million views, round in there. And this one post on Facebook got seen by 35 million people. Boy, did I need that. Because when your numbers go down, whether you know it's intentional or not, you can't escape the feeling that you are becoming irrelevant and boring. And that when you see these numbers, the disappointment compared to what you're used to or what you think you should get, the disappointment of it is, in fact, a real punch in the guts. So once again, they know what they're doing. And once again, it's having the effect that they want it to have. And I pray, once again, I'm going to summon the, I don't know, courage, I guess, to just go back out there and put the possum in the bag, I guess. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it, right? Speaking of emotional manipulation, I hate to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I think the cause is important, certainly not for my own personal enrichment. These programs, this program, all the messages, all I do is paid for by a very small group of people, and many of them are feeling it, and my gratitude to them is enormous. It's beyond my ability to convey. If you're one of those people who've been watching these shows for a long time and gotten something out of them, if you can help us, we need it. It's just, we have to buy ourselves the airtime that we used to get virally. Although I have some plans to see if we can't get that increased some other way. This is, I think, where the fight is. This is the whole thing. This is why the Republicans, if you want to know why Republicans don't vote for the repeal of Obamacare, it's because Media Matters called me a white supremacist. That's the fight. We're fighting an enemy that has no guns, has no physical violence, no physical force. They're not coming with weapons like that. They're not doing it with legislation. They're doing it with psychology, and they're succeeding. So if you're somebody who is a member, thank you. If you're somebody who has been watching this a little and is not a member and could afford to be a member, we could use the ammo here, because it's a serious business. It's actual full-on war to the death, and I don't mean to lose it either. Okay, sorry to everybody else, but yeah, we'll maybe make this a 2 or 3-parter like last time, because I answered one whole question today. That'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge. Honey, I'm coming home. Now I'm hungry. And I've heard possum stew is revolting. So, yeah, that'll do it for yet another Stratosphere Lounge show. And thanks again for listening. I learned so much from you guys in the comment section, especially when I meet you. I'd love to see you come down for the Saving California thing. It's going to be fun. But until then, we will see you next time. I need an out song. I need like I always like that Mickey Mouse ending. Now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. M-I-C. See you real soon. K-E-Y. Why? Because we like you. That almost made me cry when I was a kid. Jimmy likes me. M-O-U-S-E. All right, well, somebody can put the lyrics to BillWhittle.com together for that, and then they will win themselves a high-quality T-shirt or some other garment that we have in the back room. That'll do it. Thanks very much for joining us. It's good to see you all again, and I am sure that I will see you again soon. I'm not going anywhere, so don't you go anywhere either. That would have been a much better out if I'd actually had the right slide queued up. So don't you go anywhere either.